Hello, I'm Hope Logan. I am an actor on Bold and the Beautiful, and many people really love both me and our Bold and the Beautiful drama. So I've come here to share updates about my beloved Bold and the Beautiful. Everyone, please subscribe and support me. If you do, I will keep coming every day with new updates for you. In the world of the Bold and the Beautiful, tension quietly builds beneath the surface as Taylor Hayes finds herself stepping into a deeply complicated emotional battle. She is determined to push forward with the idea of giving Sheila Carter something she has long been denied: real, structured time with her family. But this is not a simple negotiation, and Taylor quickly realizes that every step toward progress comes with resistance, emotional weight, and consequences she may not be fully prepared for. At the heart of it all is her relationship with Deacon Sharp, who is trying to move forward with Taylor while still being legally bound to Sheila. Although Taylor and Deacon are emotionally aligned and hopeful about their future, the shadow of that unresolved marriage continues to loom over them. What should have been a fresh beginning is instead turning into a fragile balancing act between love, loyalty, and unfinished ties. Sheila, refusing to simply step aside, makes it clear that she will not sign the divorce papers without conditions of her own. She feels she is being pushed out with nothing in return, as if everything she once held is being taken away without acknowledgement. In her eyes, if Taylor has ultimately ended up with Deacon, then Sheila deserves something meaningful in exchange for letting go. That mindset leads her to lay out firm terms during the June 18th episode, setting the stage for even more emotional turbulence. Alongside her surprising request to maintain a form of friendship with Deacon, Sheila introduces another demand that carries far more emotional weight. She insists that if the divorce is to move forward, Taylor must be the one to step into a difficult role, one that tests her limits and her influence within the Forrester family circle. The demand is clear and unsettling. Taylor must advocate for Sheila to have supervised, structured access to her family. This includes monitored visitation with Hayes Finnegan and also time with her son, John Finn Finnegan. Sheila presents this request as reasonable and controlled, emphasizing that she is only asking for 2 days each month to maintain a connection with the people she considers her family. From her perspective, this is not an extreme demand, but a minimal compromise that should be accepted in exchange for finally moving forward with the divorce. However, beneath that carefully framed request lies a storm of conflict waiting to erupt, especially when Steffy Forrester becomes part of the equation. The idea of Sheila being granted any access at all is something that immediately raises alarm within the family she has repeatedly clashed with. When Taylor eventually brings the idea to Steffy Forrester Finnegan, the reaction is expected to be explosive. Taylor may try to present it as a controlled and limited arrangement, emphasizing that it is only twice a month and carefully supervised, hoping that compromise could prevent further escalation. She might even argue that keeping Sheila calm and cooperative could ultimately be safer than refusing her entirely and risking unpredictable consequences. But Steffi sees the situation through a far more protective and unforgiving lens. To her, Sheila has never been someone who can be trusted with even the smallest concession, and giving her access now feels like opening a door that can never be closed again. In Steffi's mind, the belief is simple and unshakable. If you give Sheila an inch, she will inevitably take a mile, and that risk is far too dangerous to ignore. As the pressure intensifies, Steffi's opposition hardens even further when she realizes Sheila may be using the divorce papers as leverage, effectively holding Taylor and Deacon's future hostage. That manipulation only strengthens Steffi's conviction that Sheila should not be anywhere near her son or her child, no matter how controlled the arrangement might appear. To her, this is not just about negotiation, it is about protection, boundaries, and preventing history from repeating itself. Taylor finds herself caught in the middle, trying to balance her desire for peace with the harsh reality of Steffi's unwavering resistance. The question now hangs heavily in the air. Can Taylor truly persuade Steffi to reconsider, or will this emotional standoff reach a breaking point that changes everything once again? Spoilers suggest Steffi will initially stand firm, refusing to budge, but the unpredictable nature of these family dynamics leaves open the possibility that, over time, she could soften and eventually deliver the very outcome Sheila is waiting for. As the emotional standoff deepens, the tension within the Finnegan-Forrester circle begins to feel almost suffocating, as if every conversation carries the weight of an unspoken ultimatum. Taylor Hayes finds herself increasingly cornered between two powerful forces pulling in opposite directions: her desire to protect peace and stability, and the unrelenting boundaries set by Steffy Forrester Finnegan. Every attempt Taylor makes to soften the conversation about Sheila's supervised visitation is met with Steffy's firm refusal, each rejection reinforcing just how fragile this situation truly is. Meanwhile, the unresolved marriage between Deacon Sharp and Sheila Carter continues to hang over everyone like a storm that refuses to pass, feeding the urgency behind Sheila's demands. What should have been a straightforward legal separation has now transformed into a deeply personal, emotional battleground where trust, fear, and control collide. And in the middle of it all, Taylor begins to realize that no matter how carefully she phrases her words, she cannot control how deeply others are willing to resist. Sheila, on her end, watches this conflict unfold with a quiet but calculated patience, convinced that time is ultimately on her side. From her perspective, Taylor is already showing signs of pressure and hesitation, which only reinforces Sheila's belief that her strategy is working exactly as intended. By withholding her signature on the divorce papers, she continues to maintain leverage over both Taylor and Deacon, ensuring they remain emotionally entangled in her orbit. Yet beneath her composed exterior lies a deeply personal desperation, her longing to reconnect with John Finn Finnegan and her grandson, Hayes Finnegan. To Sheila, the idea of 2 carefully monitored days each month is not just a request, but a lifeline she believes she has earned through persistence and suffering. Still, she knows that every step forward will require sacrifice from others, and she is fully prepared to keep pushing until she gets what she wants. As Taylor returns once again to Steffy, hoping that time and reflection might have softened her stance, she is instead met with the same unwavering resistance, perhaps even stronger than before. Steffy's fear is no longer just theoretical. It is rooted in everything she believes she knows about Sheila's history and unpredictable nature. The idea of supervised visits feels to her like a compromise that slowly opens the door to something far more dangerous. She argues that boundaries, once bent, rarely hold their original shape, and that Sheila has never been someone who respects limits once they are loosened. This leaves Taylor in an agonizing position, forced to question whether her attempt to mediate peace is actually creating deeper division within the family she is trying to protect. Each conversation chips away at her confidence, yet Sheila's pressure continues to mount from the outside, tightening the emotional noose around the situation. And then comes the unspoken truth that neither side wants to fully acknowledge. This is no longer just about visitation rights or divorce paperwork. It is about control, trust, and the possibility of redemption that no one can agree on. Taylor feels herself being pulled into a role she never fully chose, acting as the bridge between forgiveness and fear. Steffy, determined to protect her family at all costs, prepares herself for a battle that could strain even her bond with her mother. Sheila, unwavering in her demands, remains convinced that persistence will eventually break through resistance. And as all 3 women circle the same emotional conflict from different angles, the question grows heavier with every passing moment. How far will each of them go before something finally gives, and what will be left standing when it does? The emotional pressure continues to escalate as every attempt at compromise begins to feel less like progress and more like a slow tightening of emotional tension that no one can escape. Taylor Hayes is now fully aware that she is walking a dangerous line, one where even her best intentions can be interpreted as betrayal, depending on who is listening. Each conversation she has with Steffy Forrester Finnegan leaves behind a lingering sense of strain, as Steffy's stance remains unshaken and emotionally charged, At the same time, the unresolved connection between Deacon Sharp and Sheila Carter continues to act as the invisible chain binding everyone together, refusing to let the situation settle into peace. What was once a hopeful attempt at building stability between Taylor and Deacon is now overshadowed by legal complications, emotional bargaining, and deeply rooted mistrust. And with every passing moment, it becomes clearer that there is no simple path forward, only choices that come with consequences no one is fully prepared to face. Sheila, sensing that the pressure is beginning to wear down the edges of resistance, continues to hold firm with unsettling confidence. Her refusal to sign the divorce papers is no longer just about fairness in her eyes. It has become a calculated position of power, one she is unwilling to surrender until her demands are acknowledged in full. The idea of seeing John Finn Finnegan and Hayes Finnegan remains at the center of her emotional drive, fueling every demand she makes and every boundary she refuses to accept. To Sheila, those 2 days a month are not simply visitation, they represent validation, identity, and a chance to reclaim a place she believes was unjustly taken from her. Yet her method of pursuing this connection only deepens the mistrust surrounding her intentions, especially in the eyes of Steffy, who sees every request as another potential manipulation. The more Sheila insists, the more entrenched the opposition becomes, turning what she believes is a reasonable request into a growing source of conflict. When Taylor once again tries to bridge the gap, she finds herself facing a wall that feels increasingly immovable. Steffi does not merely disagree, she resists with a protective intensity rooted in fear, memory, and certainty about Sheila's past behavior. In Steffi's mind, supervised visits are not a compromise, but a crack in the foundation of safety she has worked so hard to maintain. She warns, in both words and tone, that allowing even limited access could spiral into something far more unpredictable than anyone is willing to risk. Taylor, caught in the middle, begins to feel the emotional toll of trying to satisfy two completely opposing realities, one rooted in reconciliation, the other in protection. The weight of this divide presses harder with each conversation, leaving Taylor increasingly uncertain whether she is building a bridge or unknowingly widening the gap. And as this emotional triangle tightens, the situation begins to reach a point where silence itself feels like anticipation before an inevitable rupture. Taylor stands at the center of a storm she did not create, but now must navigate, while Steffi holds her ground with unwavering conviction that safety cannot be compromised. Sheila, meanwhile, continues to wait and watch, convinced that persistence will eventually force movement where resistance currently stands. The divorce papers remain unsigned, the demands remain unmet, and the family remains locked in a cycle of emotional standoff with no clear resolution in sight. In this fragile balance of power and emotion, one question continues to echo beneath every conversation and every hesitation. How long can all of this hold before someone finally breaks? And what will that breaking point ultimately change for them all? The standoff finally begins to shift as the emotional strain reaches a point where even the smallest decisions feel like they could reshape everything. Taylor Hayes is no longer approaching the situation with optimism, but with a quiet exhaustion that comes from repeatedly trying to balance the impossible. Every time she speaks with Steffi Forrester Finnegan, the distance between them feels less like disagreement and more like a widening emotional divide that neither of them knows how to close. At the same time, the unresolved tension between Deacon Sharp and Sheila Carter continues to anchor the entire conflict in uncertainty as the divorce papers remain unsigned and the future remains deliberately on hold. Sheila's demands, once framed as conditions, now feel like a test of endurance that everyone is being forced to endure, whether they agree with it or not. And in this fragile silence between arguments, it becomes painfully clear that no one is truly in control anymore, only reacting to the pressure building around them. Eventually, the situation reaches a moment where silence speaks louder than negotiation, and every character is forced to confront what they are truly willing to accept. Sheila's insistence on access to John Finn Finnegan and Hayes Finnegan continues to divide opinion down the middle, with Taylor caught in the impossible role of mediator between compassion and protection. Steffi remains firmly rooted in her belief that any concession is a risk too great to take, her resolve hardened by everything she believes Sheila is capable of. Yet beneath that resistance, the emotional fatigue of constant conflict begins to show, suggesting that even the strongest boundaries are being tested by time and pressure. Taylor, watching both sides harden rather than soften, starts to realize that resolution may not come through persuasion, but through inevitability when one side can no longer sustain its position. And as the tension settles into a quiet but heavy uncertainty, the story leaves everything hanging on a single fragile question. Will fear continue to define their choices, or will compromise finally break through the walls that have held them apart for so long?